D&D can be a tough game to get into, as I'm sure many of you already know. First, you need to find some friends who are interested. Then you need to figure out an adventure to play and agree upon it. Then you need to figure out how to even play the game. And then you need to choose a dungeon master amongst your group if they haven't already volunteered themselves to do so. And then finally, you need to schedule a day to play, which is by far the worst part. And for a lot of people, all of the hassle, effort, and workload of being a dungeon master and even just creating a character and learning the rules as a player can be a big deterrent. And for a lot of people, they just end up being dungeon masterless, or they sit down at the table, see the rule books, and go, yeah, this isn't for me. And I agree, D&D's biggest flaw by far is that it can be a tough sell at times to get people hooked on rolling cool math rocks while role-playing a goblin barbarian called Grug. And I know that sounds pretty cool to a lot of us, but you'd be surprised. But that all just changed because the new D&D Starter Set was just released and we need to talk about it because it might not be what you were expecting, and if you're considering buying it, whether on a virtual tabletop or physically, you need to know some of these things I'm going to be talking about in this video. So I will be briefly showcasing all the stuff that actually comes with the physical set, but I will also be showcasing and comparing the virtual tabletop version to the physical version as well, in case you're considering buying that. And trust me, it doesn't matter which VTT you buy the starter set on, VTT meaning virtual tabletop, because they all basically include the same content from what I've seen. So feel free to use the video chapters down below to skip around to whatever part of this video interests you the most about this new starter set. Also, this video is not sponsored in any way, shape, or form by Foundry VTT, any other virtual tabletop, or Wizards of the Coast. But with all that out of the way, let's actually start talking about the physical set. Firstly, this is all that comes with the box. A play guide which teaches you how to be a player and a dungeon master, and how to use all the stuff included in the box, 3 adventure booklets for the 3 different regions in the adventure, 9 double-sided poster maps, 5 different handouts, and a combat tracker, and 8 character class boards, 210 cards for monsters, characters, items, NPCs, spells, and quick reference, 273 tokens for monsters, terrain, and resource tracking, and a set of 11 dice so that you only really need this set, and then you can pass around the dice as needed. For only $50 if you buy the physical box, you get a lot, and more importantly, literally everything you need to learn how to play the game and run a quality game. Plus, by my guesstimates, you have about 2 months worth of content if you run 1 session every week. And kind of surprisingly, the Read Me First Quick Start Guide and the Play Guide that are included in the box do an excellent job at teaching you what everything is and what to do with them when you're unpacking this treasure trove of nerd goodies, and how to play the game, of course, as a DM and a player. Also, if you find this video helpful in any way, be sure to leave a like and comment down below what you think about this new starter set, or if you've used it before, what your experience has been. But anyways, something else that's actually really interesting about this box, and something that I actually really like about it, is that it actually encourages the players to swap being the dungeon master when you switch between the adventure booklets, which is cool because it encourages each of the players to try out being the dungeon master, and maybe makes one of them realize that they like being the dungeon master more than the player. What's also super helpful is that there's a couple of QR codes to help you navigate this potentially new game that you just bought. There's one on the outside of the box and one on the quick start guide that both take you to a website talking about the box and its contents, along with some videos showcasing this box and teaching you how to use all the goodies within. And in case you're wondering, from everything I've experienced with reading through all the booklets and adventures that come with the starter set, I can confidently say, rightfully so, that you do not need any of the core rulebooks for D&D 5e to use this starter set effectively. Because in the play guide booklet, it walks you through the process of interpreting what the cards mean, where to place the cards, how to choose a character, what parts of your class board mean what, and the basics of playing the game. Plus, in the play guide, there are tons of common rules that every player constantly references, like conditions, falling rules, and rule definitions, and there are tons of guidelines and tips sprinkled not only throughout this booklet, but also all the other adventure booklets to help out new dungeon masters and players alike. So with all this being said, would it hurt to pick up any of the 3 main core rulebooks for D&D 5e, that being the Player's Handbook, Monster Manual, or the Dungeon Master's Guide, alongside the starter set? Technically, no, but I do think it would be counterintuitive because the whole point of the starter set is meant to be the easiest form of D&D possible to get people interested in the game without needing any of the core rulebooks. So I wouldn't really recommend it, especially since the Player's Handbook talks a lot about character creation, which you don't really do a whole lot of with this new starter set. And actually, speaking of character creation, you don't have to worry about that kind of stuff when using this new starter set, because it comes with 4 pre-made unique character sheets, or class boards as the set calls them, that do an utterly amazing job at taking the kind of complicated process of character creation in D&D 5e and the boring looking traditional D&D character sheet and simplifying it for new players. And what's great about these things is that while they are technically pre-made characters, they're only about 90 90% complete, because you still have to choose your species, background, equipment, and of course your token, which is a great idea because it gives the players a taste of character creation without actually running them through the entire process, which might be a downside for some of you watching. Additionally, they make resource tracking nice and easy by including tons of tokens to keep track of HP, spell slots, limited abilities, and inspiration. Although I will say that including tokens to keep track of HP I feel like is a little unnecessary, but I understand that they were going for a character sheet that was designed to not be written on at all. But still, I just feel like that these HP tokens are a bit overkill, or at least in my opinion. But let me know what you guys think in the comments. Also, what's incredibly handy is that on all the cards and class boards, they have important information in a red box, so you can easily reference at a glance what you're supposed to do when using your melee attack with a mace, or casting a spell with a save DC, or something like that. This is an awesome idea and an amazing design. However, what's a bit of a bummer is that while there are tons of cards for most pieces of low-level equipment, there aren't enough for each player to have the same piece of equipment in most cases at least. Like an example is that there are 4 lantern cards but only 2 hand crossbow cards, meaning that if you have like 4 players and each player wants to have a hand crossbow for some reason, then they could each technically have one, they just wouldn't get one of the cool hand crossbow cards they reference. And this is because the starter set assumes that you will be using the pre-made character boards along with their recommended items, so keep that in mind. Especially if you have a player who doesn't want to use any of the pre-made class boards or characters and wants to just play a barbarian, because I'd be willing to go out on a limb here and say that all of the encounters in the new starter set will probably be broken if there is a D&D 2024 barbarian in the party. But anyways, I just gotta say that while there aren't cards for every item or spell, they have all of their bases covered by having a card for every low-level spell that can be taken by one of the players, or items that can be found in the included adventures. And in all honesty guys, these cards by themselves make the purchase of the starter set, even if you're an experienced player, worth it, because as I'm sure you know, purchasing these kinds of cards and their individual sets is pretty expensive, but for only $50 with the starter set, you get an equipment set of cards, a magic item set of cards, an NPC set, a spell set, and a quick reference action set, and a monster stat block set, which can all be used outside of the starter set adventures, and you get so much more included in the starter set for just that $50 price point. Genuinely, if you just want a package deal for tons of D&D stuff that you can use for every D&D session, even if you're an experienced dungeon master or player, then the new D&D starter set is probably about as good a deal as you could ever get. And the handouts that come with the set are great as well, because rather than just being a little footnote in the adventure booklet saying that the general store has any common item from the equipment section of the PHB, there are actual handouts that you can pass the players, complete with a fun menu for the local tavern. And one thing that you might have noticed about these handouts is that the prices are all in gold pieces, and that's because the set comes with a cardboard sheet of currency tokens, which are only in gold pieces. I think this is because they're hoping to just simplify the whole currency process for beginners rather than having to deal with copper, silver, and gold pieces and their conversions. And I also think that they were taking some inspiration from Baldur's Gate and just using gold for everything currency related, which makes sense considering what type of player this product is marketed towards. But now let's focus on the big elephant in the room. Does the starter set make it easier for you to be the dungeon master? The shorter answer is yes. And like I showed you before, the set comes with literally everything you could possibly need and more for running your first D&D session and even campaign. By my count, you get 105 tokens for monsters and terrain, tons of cards that make referencing monsters, items, and spells, and NPCs super easy, and the battle maps are great quality and they all look sick. And regarding the tokens, I mean sure, they're made out of cardboard and can get bent or damaged if you don't take care of them, but considering that most D&D starter sets nowadays don't come with any minis, or if they do, they come with like 4 very flimsy ones if you're lucky, I think that this is awesome. And even for experienced players or dungeon masters, you can use these tokens as substitutes for your nice tokens. That way, if you're going to be traveling, like going on a camping trip or something like that, if these tokens happen to get damaged or broken, it's not that big a deal. Additionally, like I said earlier, the set does an excellent job at telling you what you need to say and do as a dungeon master, and in my opinion, it does a great job at holding your hand while still giving you some room to be creative and make the included adventures your own, since there's no overarching story. And speaking of which, are the adventures included in the set any good? Well, sorta. According to the Quick Start Guide, you are meant to choose one of the 3 adventures included in the box to start with. Then you can progress into one of the other adventures if you want to, and it recommends that you start with the Wilderness Adventure. This is kind of stupid in my opinion for 2 reasons, but let me explain. The set tells you to start with the Wilderness Adventure because it's the most beginner friendly, and they want you to start in the Trail region, which is fine, but the party can't long rest, a crucial mechanic in D&D, until they go to the keep. But here lies the issue. The adventure never really directly tells you that you should be directing the players to go towards the keep after a long day of adventuring. It has a section about resting at the beginning of the Wilderness booklet, but it kind of just assumes that you remember how the resting mechanic works and how crucial it is, and that you'll figure out that the party needs to take a long rest eventually to regain all their stats and will agree that they should go to the keep. But what's a little confusing, especially if you have prior D&D experience or have played through an adventure briefly yourself or have watched a live play or something like that, is that in the quick start guide, which you're supposed to read first if you're the dungeon master, it tells you that the adventure is divided into 3 self-contained booklets that each have their own tutorial area, which gives the impression that each of these adventures are meant to be played one at a time. But that would be incorrect, because the booklet specifically says that you can leave and come back to these adventures whenever you want and do one of the other ones for a little bit, and that each of the adventures aren't meant to be played through in their entirety one after the other. Also, the whole "you can't long rest in the wilderness" mechanic seems to kind of go against how most D&D tables run the game, because in my experience, you can still long rest in the wilderness or outside the dungeon. You just have to be smart about it and set up a night watch or something. But I understand that they're trying to encourage the players to move between the adventures and go back to the keep and interact with NPCs and all that kind of stuff. But anyways, I think that calling each of the booklets included in the starter set adventure booklets is incorrect and misleading, because I thought, as I'm sure that many of you thought as well, that each of these adventure booklets were going to have their own quest lines, complete with a big bad evil guy at the very end to defeat, when they really don't. And that's one of the biggest issues with this set's adventures. There is no real motivation or driving force behind the players besides being adventurers and wanting to explore, complete quests in the keep, or raid some dungeons, which is fine, but it's also kind of lackluster. Because when you think of classic D&D adventures, there is always a plot hook and always a goal. But with this set's adventures, there is no evil wizard in a tower threatening to assault the keep on the Borderlands, just as there is no real big bad evil guy. It's just pure sandbox adventure shenanigans with some questlines from the keep's officials to lightly propel the party to do stuff and go to the other regions. And I think that the adventures would be better as a whole if these booklets were instead region booklets, and the adventure was trying to discover an ancient vault, or prevent an artifact from falling into the wrong hands, or rescuing an old friend, or defeating an evil wizard, or something like that, rather than it being a true sandbox adventure with no real plot hook or storyline like what many D&D players are used to, like in the Lost Mine of Phandelver, now known as Phandelver and Below, where the overarching goal is well established throughout the various arcs of the campaign. And if I had to guess why they did this, I'm assuming it's because they want to encourage each player to try out being the dungeon master, kind of like what I showed you earlier in the video, where they encourage a kind of DM rotation where every time you change the region or the adventure booklet you're using, you also change the dungeon master. This strategy is cool because it lets each player try out being the dungeon master, don't get me wrong, but it's also kind of unrealistic since most tables have a dedicated dungeon master for an entire adventure or campaign or even a lifetime. But who knows, maybe the starter set will change that tradition. But let me know what you guys think. And I don't know about you guys, but I just wish that this box came with some better and proper adventures, complete with trying to hunt down a relic or a big bad evil guy or something like that. Because all of these booklets are lacking a good, solid, and memorable goal, and in the Wilderness's case, it doesn't have any of that. I just think that the Wilderness is pretty lacking and could use some much needed mystery or wonder beyond just showing the players the map as per what the booklet says and then asking, okay, where do you want to go? Because when you actually take a moment and look at this map, it's kind of empty and devoid of any classic fantasy icons that would inspire wonder besides the keep, the trail, and the caves of chaos. And to make matters worse, from what I can tell at least, there's no real plot hook or anything to really encourage the players to want to go back to the Wilderness and keep exploring it besides that one keep official who gives you the quest to go map the Wilderness. But in summary, the TLDR for the physical box at least is that it is definitely worth the price. And if you're looking to get yourself or your friends into D&D, I genuinely think this box is the best way and the easiest way to do so. Between the handiness and tactileness of the cards and tokens and the ease of use of the class boards and play guide, I can say with the utmost certainty that as a professional dungeon master who specializes in getting new players into D&D and teaching it to them, this box makes it the easiest out of any of the other boxes or sets that I have used. And by my guesstimates, if you complete every quest and activity in the 2025 starter set, you have about 2 to 3 months of content if you have one 1 to 3 hour session weekly. Again though, that's just my estimate, and that's only if you do everything in the adventure, and of course if you don't get bored halfway through or decide to switch to a different adventure after completing one of the adventure booklets and so forth. But will these adventures be perfectly fine for 80% of tables with new players? Yes, they're perfectly fine. And is this box great even if you're an experienced player and dungeon master? Totally, yes. But if you agree with some of my opinions and observations, then I would just recommend being brave and tweaking the adventures slightly to include whatever sort of story or plot hook you want to use. I also just want to commend the team or whoever designed these class boards because they are awesome, but I almost guarantee that if a brand new player goes from these to a traditional D&D character sheet, there will be some tears because these class boards will spoil your players. So yes, the new D&D starter set is worth the price and is frankly a fantastic product, and despite the issues with the adventures, I still think it is the best D&D starter set for introducing new players to D&D. But if you want a real beginner adventure with real plot hooks, a real big bad evil guy, and a real story, then I'd recommend checking out Phandelver and Below, previously known as The Lost Mine of Phandelver. But to finish things off, let's briefly talk about the virtual versions of the starter set. Since I didn't purchase the starter set on any other virtual tabletops besides Foundry, since I think that Foundry would be the best bang for your buck based off of what I've seen, I'm going to use that as the showcase. Firstly, the landing screen looks great, and they utilize the Foundry lighting effects wonderfully to bring it to life and get your players excited. And the Foundry module, along with the other Roll20 and D&D Beyond versions from what I've seen online, contain the same digital versions of all the maps, NPCs, monsters, booklets, and handouts that come with the physical set. But I will say that from everything I've seen, I think that Foundry's journals look the best and are probably the easiest to navigate and use due to Foundry's system for being able to place journals on maps and hyperlink other kinds of NPCs and monsters onto journals and all that kind of stuff for ease of use and navigation. Also, I just gotta say that all of the tokens for the monsters, NPCs, terrain, and bosses all look amazing, and I definitely think that these two things, those being the quality of the journals and the tokens, definitely justify the extra $5 that you pay for the Foundry VTT version. But there are no cool gold tokens, cards, character boards, or new features that come with the module, so there's no real benefit to buying this adventure module over other beginner D&D mods if your goal is to get into DMing and get your friends into D&D. And I guess it's up to you if this is a really big selling point or not, but you should know that there are other adventure mods for Foundry that do the exact same thing that this one does in terms of teaching you how to be a player, how to be a dungeon master, and how to use Foundry. I just think that this one explains it the best out of any of the other ones that I've used. But regarding the maps, they're all high resolution and are pretty standard for a virtual tabletop, and of course look great. And for the Foundry VTT module in particular, each map comes with pre-placed notes, monster tokens, walls, light sources, and some maps even utilize Foundry's new region feature to help you keep track of difficult terrain automatically. But sadly, at the time of recording, there are no ambient sounds on any of the maps. Also, you don't get any soundtracks or sound effects with the module, which is a bit of a bummer. But to answer the question of, is the Foundry VTT or any of the other virtual tabletop modules worth it? I would say it depends. If you're looking to get into being a dungeon master and you want a nice, simple, and easy way to learn how to do that and what it takes to be a dungeon master on Foundry or any other virtual tabletop, but still want the opportunity to add your own creative flair to an adventure without having to worry about screwing up the overarching narrative, then this starter set on Foundry or any other virtual tabletop is worth it. But if you're already an experienced player in Dungeon Master and already kind of have a grasp on how to use Foundry, then I would just recommend purchasing a different adventure because this one doesn't really offer you anything else besides teaching you how to be a player in Dungeon Master and how to use Foundry or whatever virtual tabletop you might be using from the ground up. So if I were you, I would just recommend checking out and purchasing one of the various adventures that are available on your VTT's marketplace. But with that, everybody, thank you so much for watching this video, and please consider leaving a like if you liked this video or found it helpful in any way. And hey, subscribe if you want to see more content like this. And of course, leave a comment down below regarding something I talked about in this video or your experience or what you think about the starter set, because I always enjoy reading those. But I hope to see you guys in the next video. Take it easy. Bye-bye.